I'd like to introduce the first speaker, who is my fellow director and partner in crime, Dr Ron Ehrlich, who's the most wonderful holistic dentist, passionate holistic healthcare advocate, and he is going to take you on a very interesting journey, and he'll tell you about his adventures with ACNEM, which is the Australian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine. Please welcome Dr Ron Ehrlich.
I think we have a real problem with our healthcare system. It's really not a healthcare system, it's really become a disease management system. And we are constantly being told that we can't afford it, and I don't think we can afford it. We can't afford it personally, or we can't afford it as a community, and financially, of course, we can't afford it either. And the problem also is that when we are talking at all about health and wellness, the messages are so confusing and contradictory. And to a large extent, that's what today's about. Hopefully taking you from confusion to clarity and providing you with some information that becomes knowledge. And don't get me wrong, I think Western medicine is brilliant when it comes to crisis therapy. I mean, every single day in hospitals around the world, there is some incredible surgery being done, reconstructions, restoration of function, removal of organs and still keeping people alive. It's quite incredible. When it comes to crisis therapy, Western medicine is second to none. But the problem is, what do we define as crisis, and how does Western medicine actually deal with chronic disease? And that's where I think we have some real problems. So today, what I wanted to do was take you on a journey. I wanted to cover three things today. I wanted to give you a brief history of Western medicine in 5 minutes. I wanted to also explain to you, give you my perspective on why health messages are so confusing. And finally, I wanted to share with you what I consider to be the most significant piece of research in nutrition ever done. Well, that's a pretty big call, but hey, we're going to do it. So let's look at Western medicine. And I'm going to spend about 5 minutes covering the highlights, as I see it, of 2,500 years of Western medicine. The first person, and really what we've got going in Western medicine, as I see it, is either we've got a health model or we've got a disease model. And when we start to look at who built those two models, you've got to start with a guy called Hippocrates. I mean, every single health practitioner has either verbally or at least made a silent oath that they will take the Hippocratic Oath. And the Hippocratic Oath says, do no harm. And Hippocrates, was 400 BC, so that's 2,500 years ago, said a lot of great things. He said a lot of great things, but I'll just share two of them with you. And one of them was that disease was not a function of the gods. It wasn't that the gods were angry. It was that there was an imbalance in our bodies. And perhaps today's God is genetics, and we'll come to that in a moment. But gods were not responsible for the illness that occurred. It was an imbalance in the body. And what he also said was, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. That's pretty relevant today as it was 2,500 years ago. Now let's fast forward 2,000 years to the 1600s. I told you it was only going to take 5 minutes, and these are my highlights, by the way. And if you were looking for somebody who Western medicine has been built on, you would have to look at this guy who was René Descartes. And Descartes was a mathematician, French mathematician and a philosopher. And he said lots of things. I mean, he had a huge influence on so many aspects. But I'm going to just share three things with you that he said that is really the foundation of Western medicine. And one of them is that you need to break things down into their smallest parts in order to understand that. And at that time, that is exactly what you had to do in order to understand it. He also said that things had to be statistically significant in order to be relevant. And he also said, let the mind and body are separate, so they need to be considered separate. Now, if those three things haven't had a profound influence on the way Western medicine is practiced today, I mean, my own mother, my 89-year-old mother, now the wonders of modern medicine, she just had an aortic valve replacement. Incredible. They passed an aortic valve up through the artery in the leg and replaced the valve. And a fantastic piece of surgery. She had a slight complication, and so she had a raised temperature, an elevated temperature. And the cardiologist tried to establish what that raised temperature was, couldn't do it, so had to call in a respiratory physician because he needed an opinion on the lungs. She couldn't work it out either, so then they called in a gastroenterologist because it could have been in the gut. And neither of those two other practitioners were really qualified enough to deal with it. And finally, they called in a urologist to check whether that was the factor. And but I worked out that between the four of them, there was well over 100 years of medical training and experience, and yet neither of them could work out why her temperature was elevated. So this is an example of the wonders of modern medicine. Fantastic. You know, replace an aortic valve in an 89-year-old woman. Could they work out some basic stuff? No, just couldn't work it out. Anyway, let's fast forward to a guy called Isaac Newton. And the reason I include Newton is because if I wanted to go back and study anything, I would not be doing a PhD in the cure of cancer. I would be doing a PhD in anatomy, physiology and biochemistry. Because if we understood those basic sciences, we'd eliminate 90% of diseases anyway. And if you want to study physiology, physiology is a combination of two words, physics and biology. And Newton, of course, helped us explain the way the world worked. And he had a very linear way of thinking too. I mean, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. When you push something, it moves. And we'll come back to him. Now I move on to a guy called Pasteur. Now, Pasteur came up with the germ theory. And he basically said germs cause disease, which sounded like a really neat model. Another guy called Beauchamp, who argued with him and said, it's not the germ that causes the disease, it's the body in which the germ is placed. When that's out of balance, building on Hippocrates' idea, then the germ takes hold. And this argument went backwards and forwards. Of course, Pasteur won the argument in the end, but apparently on his deathbed, he did agree with Beauchamp. Anyway, let's fast forward then to a guy you may not have heard of, but this is a guy called Walter Cannon, who's a physiologist in the States in the early part of the 1900s, and he came up with the term homeostasis. And homeostasis is the function, the process of balance in the body. So building on this imbalance, he came up with the term homeostasis. Fast forwarding now, because if we're talking about physics, we have to talk about quantum physics. And as difficult as that may be to explain, and I'm not even going to try and explain it to you, other than I love this slide because he almost looks like he's writing my name on it. I was drawn to it immediately, but actually I prefer this one because quantum physics is a bit hard to get a handle on. You know, it basically said, instead of thinking very linearly, it was saying, well, every atom in the universe is made up of matter and energy. A kind of a paradox, really. And that means every atom in this room, and that means every atom in our bodies, and every patient that we see, every one of us is affected by matter and energy. So this is a really important thing to remember when we're thinking about the human body. And then I go on to, and we're getting close now to the end of the 2,500 years, we're up to about 1920s where Howard Florey discovered antibiotics, and there couldn't be a more wonderful invention, discovery than antibiotics. How many millions of lives has that saved? And it fitted in beautifully with the germ theory, which said, well, you know, germ causes disease, let's have a pill to fix it. It fixed it, there's a model. So if you're depressed, why not take an antidepressant? If you're unable to sleep, take a sleeping pill. Inflammation, anti-inflammatory, and so it goes on. So this is the way Western medicine has built. And then I've included also Crick and Watson. Now, they began that whole, they of course discovered the DNA and work has been done on the human genome ever since. And I think what we're entering into now is a period of what I call genetic determinism. Genetic determinism is saying you're genetically predisposed to a condition and that's it. You know, we need to work out how to splice those genes or give you a medication or do something which will alter that gene. We've got the treatment for it. Another person, and if you haven't read this guy's book, Bruce Lipton, I would recommend it to you highly. I'm not sure whether he was the discoverer of epigenetics, but he's a PhD in cell biology, and he basically said, he was talking about thoughts. He said, thoughts become proteins called neurotransmitters, and they attach onto cell membranes, and it's the cell membrane that is the real brain of the body, and it causes genes to express themselves in the way they do. That's epigenetics. If you haven't heard the term epigenetics, you will be hearing a lot about it in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And it's an incredibly empowering concept, because what it says is, in his case, he was talking about thoughts, but so can nutrients and so can environmental toxins attach to cell membranes and cause genes to express themselves in a certain way. So this is my model. This is a brief history of Western medicine as I see it, with on one side building on Hippocrates and looking at homeostasis and taking into account quantum physics, and on the other side, the Western model, which breaks things down to its smallest component and attempts to intervene to try to solve those problems. And both have value. Both have value. Now, and this has had a profound effect on the way people think generally, but in medicine particularly, in health particularly. The Newtonian way of thinking, very linear. In quantum physics, very holistic. Now, I'm often asked, I'm a holistic dentist, and I'm often asked, what is a holistic dentist? And a holistic dentist is simply somebody whose primary focus is the person attached to the tooth rather than just the tooth. Now, you know, that is quite a different way of looking at things. Who suffered from ulcers in the mouth. They're called aphthous ulcers, and they typically occur, they can be quite painful. They last for about 7 to 10 days, and they run their own course. And they're actually an autoimmune disease, and the way people generally handle or deal with that is just to ride it out or use a mouth rinse or some sort of cortisone cream. But when the patient came to see me, I said to him, it's an autoimmune disease. I think what we've got is we've got to be thinking about grains here, because grains produce a protein called zonulin, and zonulin causes cells in the gut to become loose. So if these are two cells, they become loose, and so undigested protein enters the bloodstream, and the body mounts an autoimmune disease. Well, he went off grains. I suggested he go off them for a month. He went off them for more than a month. He lost 15 kilos. He stopped his arthritis medication, and he didn't have any mouth ulcers. So this is a slightly more holistic approach to a problem that isn't particularly linear. Anyway, moving on. That's the model. And now, evidence of success for this model, this Western model, I mean, after 30 years or 40 years of low-fat dogma and a total preoccupation with cholesterol and a food pyramid that's built on, I don't know what, we'll talk about that in a moment. Heart disease still number 1, cancer's number 2, and autoimmune diseases are number 3. And autoimmune diseases, what are they? Here's a list. I'm not going to go into it, but they're a huge list of autoimmune diseases. I mean, eczema, asthma, celiacs, rheumatoid arthritis, the list goes on and on and on. Thyroid dysfunction. Okay? Now, autoimmune diseases, I mean, autism is a good example. It affects 1 in 100 children nowadays. ADHD, 1 in 10. I mean, allergies affects 1 in 3 children. And in the last, asthma also, a major problem amongst children. So autoimmune is going crazy. Childhood cancer, diabetes, obesity, depression, more than doubled in the last 20 years. Now, what about cancer? I mean, you know, the war on cancer was declared in 1975. How are we going? Where's the evidence? And some really disturbing trends here. I mean, look at thyroid cancer has gone through the roof. Well, people ask me about fluoride. You know, I have some concerns. Look, I got this in the mail a few months ago, local pizza place, and on there was reassuringly 6 Heart Foundation ticks, and I tried to envisage all these cardiologists testing out all of these pizzas and going, that's good, that's not, no, we won't have that, we'll do that. Okay, it's not quite what happens, because what happens is McDonald's also have ticks, and since 2004, they've had ticks, right? And what is it? They pay the Heart Foundation $50,000 a tick, and for $330,000, there are the 7 ticks. And Weight Watchers even got in on the deal because they took tallow, they took animal fat out of frying up the chips, and they put in vegetable oils, which is very unstable, but it's good. You're going to learn a lot about fats today. Thankfully, McDonald's took the tick away. And when was that? September 2011. Now, actually, what I thought they should have done was done this. I wasn't sure whether this was guerrilla activity by the Heart Foundation. No, it wasn't. I just got to the gym a bit earlier, and this happens to be next to McDonald's. But anyway, interestingly enough, and we digress for a moment, but McDonald's shares fell after their shares fell about 6 months later. I wonder if there's some connection there. If we took ticks away from food, maybe some of the health would improve as well. Now, I'm on the committee of the Australian College of Nutritional Environmental Medicine. I'm actually chairman of the advocacy committee, and the advocacy committee said to me, they said, look at all the other advocacy policies, and the Heart Foundation's one that I looked at, went back over 30 years. Now, remember, if any cholesterol, if any LDLs cause problems, they're those that are oxidised. You may hear something about that today. But oxidisation occurs when you have too much glucose in your bloodstream, and too much glucose comes from eating too much sugar or carbohydrates. Now, when I reviewed theirs, and I'll save you the fine print, 1980s, of course, their focus was on ticks. In 1990s, get rid of saturated fats again. 95, get rid of trans fats, even though they put vegetable oils instead of animal fat into the fries. Trans fats are very unstable in vegetable oils. They also wanted to broaden the definition of whole grains, and they did that in association with the American Cereal Grain Foundation and Go Grains Australia. Reduce kilojoules, get rid of fat, get rid of fat. I mean, there's not one mention in there of sugar. Not one mention. That's scary. Obesity, that's a big problem. This group here, they helped the World Health Foundation sort out what BMI was and all that, and very august body. Go on their website and find out what they're still pushing, and that is reduce saturated fat. And who sponsors this? Who is this organisation funded by? It's funded by La Roche, the makers of, I can't even say it, Exenical. It's a dietary pill. Or this group, Abbott. They make this thing called Reductil, which actually is a brand name is Meridia. Losing weight is much easier with Meridia. Yeah, well, it's actually off the market now because there's a class action in America on Meridia because A, it doesn't work, and B, it causes cardiovascular disease. Small problem. But let's fund the International Obesity Task Force. Now, what about diabetes? Let's go to an august organisation like diabetes. The World Diabetes Day just on recently, our purpose is to help people through. 95% of diabetes is type 2 diabetes. And who are the sponsors of the world? All the drug companies that you could poke a stick at. And yet we all know that the cure for type 2 diabetes is diet and exercise. So why are all these companies looking for a cure? And that's scary. People like these World Diabetes Federation are giving out advice. And let's go into the Dietitians Association. The American Dietitians Association has got some sponsors. You would have to have a sponsor of the drug company, and you would also want to have Pepsi Cola as a sponsor. And just to give you one small example of what could happen there, I wanted to pick something really simple. Frequent consumption of sugar in any beverage can be a significant factor in a child or adolescent. This came from the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry. Not a controversial statement, but what is the effect of corporate on health messages? And here was $1 million was donated by Pepsi in 2004, and here's the new statement. Okay, so that just gives you an example of where corporates can have an influence. And then you go on, well, Coca-Cola are now corporate sponsors, and here's a list of corporate sponsors. It's just incredible. Well, no, you think maybe, and this is the food pyramid we're getting a hold on now, where this might be coming from. Confusing health messages, perhaps. Here's another group that prides itself on nutritional excellence in research in America, and just take a look at their list of sponsors. Just take a look at their list of sponsors. Even the Sugar Foundation has found its way on there, and Monsanto. You've got to have drug companies included in these things. So why are health messages so confusing? The food pyramid, this is what it's built on. And don't worry, the Australian Dietetics Association, that's much better. We've got Abbott Nutrition, they're a pharmaceutical company. We've also got Nutrica, which does some formula for kids. Unilever, of course, you would want B-Cell and Ben & Jerry's to be a proud sponsor of the Australian Nutrition Foundation. Dairy Australia, grains and legumes, Campbell's, Arnott's, Kellogg's, of course, and you wouldn't want to do anything without Nestle. I am on the board of this, and this is a very exciting group to be on, and we are taking some health messages and starting to advocate For 30 years they've been teaching profession, but they're starting to advocate. And here are some of the issues that are being discussed. And of course, I've managed to get low-carb nutrition on there as well, and grass-fed and grain-fed meat. Okay, lessons from the past. Just finally, very quickly, the most important research in nutrition that has ever been, and that, without knowing it, I think is this guy, Weston A. Price. He was looking at epigenetics. He didn't call it that, but that's actually what was going on, because so many people say, oh, my parents had decay, I had decay. My parents had crowded teeth, I had crowded teeth. So there's always this genetic idea that genetics is what causes it. And he wrote this book, which is great. But here is just what he did. He went into many different cultures, traditional cultures in the early 20s, and he looked at all these people that were on traditional diets, and they had beautiful broad teeth, all 32 of their teeth. I'm not even going to ask how many people in this room. Okay, I will. How many people in this room have all 32 of their teeth through and in their mouth and in beautiful alignment? So if you've got wisdom teeth that are impacted, that doesn't count. I think I see out of about 250, about 4 or 5 hands go up. Isn't that weird? I mean, 32 teeth. What if we had only enough room for 4 fingers? And we all knew at the age of 18, listen, no big deal, we're going to get rid of the 4th finger. We wouldn't feel the same about it, but we feel okay about this crowding going on here, and that has implications on our health. So he visited all these different cultures, and what he saw was groups that were genetically identical that had that were on traditional diets, and those that had moved into the city and were on Western diets. So he eliminated the genetics, and he saw the effect of nutrients on the genetic potential of a person. And decay on the one side went through the roof, and on the normal traditional diets was not affected hardly at all. They had beautiful broad teeth, they had no degenerative diseases, and as soon as they moved into the cities, they had these kind of problems, all the diseases of Western civilization. And on the one side you see a well-developed arches and no decay, and here moving into the city, and he saw it all around the world. He went all around the world. And narrow faces that occur, crowding of teeth, even brothers from the same family. So what are traditional foods? Very quickly, this is the lesson you're going to hear a lot today about a whole range of different things. Some of you may be familiar with them, some of you may not be, but stay tuned, keep an open mind. I think there's going to be a lot of great information today, but the thing that he found was that the foods that were eaten traditionally were nutrient dense. They had 4 times the amount of water-soluble vitamins, calcium and other minerals. They had at least 10 times the fat-soluble vitamins, A, D and K, which are really important for health, general health throughout the whole body, bone, teeth, the whole bit. The foods were rich in fat-soluble vitamins A, D, which were found only in animal products. And there were no refined or denatured foods. They consumed some sort of animal foods. They used traditional vegetable oils, palm, coconut, olive. They had a very high content in fermented foods. There were a lot of food enzymes and beneficial bacteria. And importantly, equal amounts of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, which are only found in grass-fed meat, and a whole range of other things that also were very important in nutrition. So there's the health model. When I see something like this, I get concerned. I mean, environmentally, it's a disaster. Cattle do not eat grains, and they're only eating grains because they want to be fattened up. That's why you feed cattle grains, to fatten them up. And in a natural diet, we all know that cattle prefer to eat grass, and grass-fed cattle are good for the environment, as you'll hear from Vicky later on today, but also their proportion of omega-3 to omega-6 is almost equal. Omega-6 in a grain-fed cow is 20 times higher. And that's a real problem. It's pro-inflammatory, bad for the planet. And the food, and here we are being told to eat grains. What science is this based on? I think it's based on the science of economics. And if ever there was an oxymoron, the science of economics is one of them. I don't think such a thing actually exists. And now we've got a much better version of that, which still places grains very high up. So lessons from the past. What should we eat? Well, you're going to be hearing a lot more about that today. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.